In 1931, Universal's Frankenstein gave audiences one of cinema's most shocking moments. The scene would soon be cut, not to be restored for 5 decades. Maria's death communicated to audiences in this equally harrowing scene. But this cut makes the murder an act of mindless brutality because it also removes the creature's reaction. He didn't mean to hurt her. This controversial scene, to which even star Boris Karloff objected, encapsulates director James Whale's vision for Frankenstein. To understand James Whale's impact on Universal's Frankenstein, we have to look at what it might have been, rushed into development following the unexpected success of Dracula as another horror vehicle for star Bela Lugosi.
I bid you welcome.
Garrett Fort, who had worked on Dracula, was assigned to write the script, adapted from the stage play by Peggy Webling and John Balderston, based on the novel by Mary Shelley, alongside Robert Florey, who would also direct. Florey and Fort must be considered co-authors of the finished film. Though most of Florey's dialogue was rewritten, the sense of it remains, and the basic structure is Florey's. But the changes that Whale and new screenwriter Edward Francis Farrago made after Florey was removed are telling. In the Florey-Fort version, the creature murders Maria for no reason, and not just her. It watches 2 peasants have sex, then kills them both while their children listen in terror. This is a monster, as befit a follow-up to Dracula. Whale made Maria's death a tragic misunderstanding and cut the other murders. The new script didn't add many scenes, but those it did are key, particularly that in which we first meet the creature. In Shelley's novel, the creature expresses his humanity through pages of eloquent dialogue. Whale establishes it in one gesture, with the help of actor Boris Karloff. The success of Frankenstein is down to these 2 men, Karloff's performance and Whale's vision.
How do you do?
There's a theatricality to the film, as you might expect given Whale's stage background, particularly evident in Edward Van Sloan's introductory warning.
I think it will thrill you. It may shock you. It might even horrify you.
The graveyard opening too could easily be a stage set. But the camera is constantly on the move at a time when they were typically encased in static boxes so as not to interfere with sound recording. Whale loved camera movement, finding an eager collaborator in cameraman Arthur Edison, a silent veteran happy to experiment. Not even walls obstruct the tracking shots. Close-ups too are used far more than was typical for the time, and this mix of the cinematic and the theatrical is the essence of the Whale style, both in evidence in the film's most pivotal scene.
Quite a good scene, isn't it?
Frankenstein playing impresario to an audience of his mentor, his fiancée and his best friend, as he attempts to bring to life his creature, built of stitched together corpses. The electrical equipment, designed by Kenneth Strickfaden and reused for the next 40 years, makes the scene fantastic, reflecting the influence of German expressionist cinema, of which Whale was an admirer. But the scene is played in deadly earnest. Whale spent 5 days on this one scene, later saying, if the audience did not believe the thing had really been made, they would not be bothered by what was to follow. And what follows is pure cinema.
It's alive.
And we believe.
Oh, it's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Who was James Whale? People assumed him to be the upper-class English gentleman he appeared, but that too was a character of his own creation. Whale was born in the town of Dudley, son of a blast furnaceman, his fragile build and artistic talent setting him apart in the mining town. Serving in the trenches during the First World War, he was captured and sent to a POW camp, where he threw himself into the camp's amateur theatricals, later saying, "I sincerely believe that training meant as much to me as anything I have learned since." After the war, he joined a repertory company, working his way into the London theatre scene, a place where he could be himself, professionally as an actor and set designer, and personally as a gay man. His early forays into direction went largely unnoticed, until in 1928 he was offered a new play by R.C. Sheriff called Journey's End. Whale was initially reluctant, it was only 2 performances, but with Laurence Olivier in the lead, those performances garnered such glowing notices that it won itself a run in the West End. Olivier was now unavailable, and despite a poor audition, Whale saw something in the brooding intensity of actor Colin Clive. Clive struggled in rehearsals, only finding his confidence when Sheriff suggested that he take a drink to calm his nerves. It was a vice that saved the show and set Clive on the road to stardom, but it would eventually destroy him. Following the success of Journey's End in America, Whale was invited to Hollywood as a dialogue director. Though his experience on The Love Doctor was disappointing, he liked the medium, later saying, "It is hard work, but I love it." He had also met a reader at Paramount named David Lewis, the man with whom he would spend much of the rest of his life.
Rather a coincidence, isn't it?
Yes. I'm awfully glad to be in your company, Stanhope.
The film version of Journey's End brought Whale to the attention of Universal studio head Carl Laemmle Jr., who invited him to direct Waterloo Bridge, an often overlooked gem in his back catalogue. As Whale joined, Universal had just reported the biggest fiscal loss in its history, but had just scored a huge hit with Dracula. Whale was charged with directing the film designed to follow up that success. His first act was to retain his crew from Waterloo Bridge, including Arthur Edison and set designer Charles D. Hall, the man who would define the architecture of Universal horror.
Open the door! Let us in!
Much of this team would remain intact for years to come, Whale favouring the feel of a theatrical company. Actress Mae Clarke, wonderful in Waterloo Bridge, was cast as Elizabeth, and Frederick Kerr.
They tell me some of the people in your country are trying to do away with wine altogether.
Would play another doddering father.
Why does he go messing round an old ruined windmill?
For Henry Frankenstein, Whale once again turned to Colin Clive, who would be on the wagon during the production, and who delivers another performance of rare intensity.
He's just resting, waiting for a new life to come.
The name switch between Victor Frankenstein, as he is in the book, and his best friend Henry comes from the stage play, in which, incidentally, Henry introduces his creature as Frankenstein. So that argument's been going on a while. Rounding out the cast were theatre actors Dwight Fry and Edward Van Sloan.
Herr Frankenstein was interested only in human life. First to destroy it, then recreate it.
Both of whom had appeared in Dracula alongside Bela Lugosi. Lugosi had no interest in playing the grunting brute of the Florey Fort script. He had hoped to play the Doctor. Would he have felt differently under James Whale? We'll never know, and it's hard to tell exactly how he lost the role. Did he jump, or was he pushed? When Junior Laemmle seemed lukewarm over his script, Robert Florey decided to shoot a test scene. Lugosi had previously clashed with Universal's makeup head Jack Pierce over Dracula, in the end doing his own makeup, and some accounts say that he did the same for the Frankenstein test, covering himself with hair. Edward Van Sloan remembered him looking like the golem, his head 4 times its normal size, while Robert Florey insisted that he had exactly the same makeup as Karloff. The last known copy of the test rotted away in the garage of cameraman Paul Ivano, and while Lugosi was apparently happy with the result, Florey was removed from the project shortly after. Laemmle later said, "I simply felt that James Whale could do a better job of it." Possibly this gave Lugosi the chance to jump ship. Possibly his reluctance had soured relations with the studio. Too much time has passed and every biographer twists it their way. My own opinion, and it is just that, is that James Whale had a different image in mind. Karloff would later recall how Whale had spotted him in the Universal Studio commissary and asked him to test for the role, but Whale biographer James Curtis has cast doubt on this as the dates don't quite match, suggesting that David Lewis had seen Karloff in stage play The Criminal Code. Doesn't really matter, Whale liked Karloff's face and his queer, penetrating personality. Just as importantly, Karloff was willing to subject himself to Pierce's lengthy makeup tests without complaint. Unlike Lugosi, Karloff had never come close to breaking big as a star and took every job he was offered. In some ways, Karloff had the background that Whale pretended to have. Born William Henry Pratt to an upper-middle-class British family, he enjoyed a private education and a future in the consular service, a family tradition. But young William had other dreams and emigrated to Canada to become an actor. He worked as a farm labourer, shoveled coal and laid railroad track before finally getting a role with a stock company who required someone with just one head and a pair of legs. Sounds like a low bar, but the newly rechristened Boris Karloff was so bad that his pay was halved. For years, Karloff alternated theatre with manual labour, until a vaudeville show he was touring with ran out of steam in Los Angeles, and the penniless actor turned to the movies. His dark skin, legacy of an Indian grandmother, got him roles as Native Americans, Arabs and a South Sea Islander. But he still had to take other work, notably as a truck driver, even though he couldn't drive. By 1931, Karloff had appeared in 80 films and had no idea that the next would change his life forever. Though he would suffer for it. Arriving at the studio at 4 a.m, Karloff spent around 5 hours in the makeup chair. To fill out his lean frame, he wore a quilted suit under his costume, making him uncomfortably hot. Asphalt spreader's boots increased his height and gave the creature its distinctive gait, as did the metal rod up his spine. The final touches were suggested by Karloff himself, removing his dental bridgework so he could suck in his cheek to make his face more cadaverous. He also thought his eyes looked too alive, so Pierce added mortician's wax to the lids. Effective, but painful. And if the application was bad, the removal was worse. Another 2 hours in the chair, leaving his skin raw. But it was worth it. The creature's horrifying appearance shocked audiences of the time. But Pierce's technique of layering makeup rather than using inflexible prosthetics left Karloff's features mobile, allowing him to act. Karloff's creature is a lost child, acting on instinct, unprepared for the cruel world into which he has been born.
Quiet, you fool!
He is the movie's unexpected heart. Far more monstrous is Dwight Fry's malevolent Fritz, playing with fire. The creature mostly kills in self-defense, as when Dr. Waldman tries to dissect him. While Maria is an accident, all the more heartbreaking because, for once, the creature was happy. A moment cruelly shattered. The real life of actress Marilyn Harris was more horrifying than anything in the film, courtesy of her abusive mother, and it's a relief to hear that she did enjoy filming, becoming particularly attached to Karloff, who later noted that children weren't scared of the creature. Adults were, and offset, Karloff had to wear a bag over his head after terrifying a secretary. The creature does attack Elizabeth, but doesn't harm her, which it certainly could have. One of the film's few missteps is when Henry protects Elizabeth by locking her in her room, which is why she can't get away, but it never feels credible. As the film approaches its climax, Universal Horror's first torch-wielding mob hunts the creature. And he lashes back. Years of hard work had made Karloff physically strong, but carrying Colin Clive was still punishing, as Whale called for take after take. Karloff did not complain, but would suffer back problems for the rest of his life. As the creature takes refuge in the mill, the mob move in. Who's the monster here? There's long been an assumption that Whale's obvious identification with the victimised creature was to do with his sexuality, making him an outsider. But James Curtis points out that Whale was open about his sexuality, and a very social man. He had far more of a hang-up about class, losing his accent, lying about his origins, even mocking Karloff, the truck driver. David Lewis insisted that his partner's films were the work of not a gay artist, but an artist. Which is not to say that you can't glimpse Whale in both the creature and creator, a connection the director underlines. Just before the creature's first entry, Henry has a speech that is not in any script, possibly written by Whale himself.
You never wanted to look beyond the clouds and the stars, or to know what causes the trees to bud?
It sounds like the boy from Dudley, who saw a world that no one else could perceive.
But if you talk like that, people call you crazy.
This version of Henry Frankenstein did create a problem. In the Florey Fort script, it's not just the creature who's unsympathetic. Frankenstein tortures his creation with a whip and branding iron. His death is deserved, and the script gives Elizabeth an alternate husband.
I leave her in your care, whatever happens. You understand? In your care.
But early previews, while generally positive, objected to the death of Clive's more thoughtful Frankenstein. So a new scene was shot to give Henry and Elizabeth, played by stand-ins, a happy ending. Whale was not involved, but apparently approved. And so, in December 1931, audiences got their first look at Frankenstein. Dracula was a shock to audiences who had never seen anything like it. Frankenstein was a masterpiece and a box office phenomenon, breaking house records around the country, and courting controversy too, with one particular line excised until the 1980s.
Oh, in the name of God, now I know what it feels like to be God.
Boris Karloff, suddenly a star at the age of 44, got a Universal contract, though his only comment was that it would be nice to know where breakfast was coming from. Whale was now a star director, able to work in his own way, with his own team, crafting material to his taste. All of which would be vital when he returned to Frankenstein 4 years later. Sequels were less inevitable in 1931 than today, but with such box office, it was soon being discussed, with Robert Florey immediately sending in a treatment for The New Adventures of Frankenstein, The Monster Lives. But Whale, riding high after The Invisible Man, said he had squeezed the idea dry, and that the script by Tom Reed stinks to high heaven. New drafts were prepared by L.G. Blockman, who had Henry and Elizabeth join a travelling carnival, and Philip MacDonald, who had Henry selling the League of Nations a death ray that also resurrects the creature. Next up was John Balderston, who went back to the book, having the creature wreak a terrible vengeance after Henry refuses to build him a mate. A word to which the censors objected, as it suggests that the creature desires a sexual companion. Whale himself went to R.C. Sheriff, writer of Journey's End, who had also scripted The Invisible Man and A Trip to Mars, the most tantalising of Whale's unrealised projects. The final script was by William Hurlbut and mystery novelist Edmund Pearson, marrying ideas from the novel to Wales' own increasingly eccentric concepts. The result would be one of the greatest sequels of all time.
It's a perfect night for mystery and horror. The air itself is filled with monsters.
Karloff had been merely a question mark in the opening credits of Frankenstein. Its sequel, eventually titled The Bride of Frankenstein, showcased his change in status. The actor had supplanted Bela Lugosi as Universal's leading horror star, with performances in The Mummy, The Old Dark House, again with Whale, and The Black Cat.
It is the origin of the common superstition.
He had also succeeded outside of the genre, playing Count Ladrance in The House of Rothschild.
Only necessity brings me here.
Whale resented his star's success, feeling Karloff got too much credit for his film. Knowing where breakfast was coming from meant that Karloff's features were now fuller, but Pierce's makeup took care of that. The creature's fire-scarred appearance actually evolves through the film as his hair grows back.
Think of the power to create a man. And I did.
Colin Clive too returned, but May Clark had lost her Universal contract following illness and was replaced by Valerie Hobson. Also back was Dwight Fry, whose theatrical career had been sadly damaged by his association with horror films.
No. That's no do. They soft like cat.
Whale amalgamated 3 characters from the script into the larger role of Carl, who murders his family and frames the monster. But Fry still lost out, as most of this was cut by the studio. The film was originally 15 minutes longer. Marilyn Harris also appears, Whale adding a line so she was paid more, while Una O'Connor and E.E. Clive essentially reprised their roles from The Invisible Man. The 2 most significant additions came from Whale's past. In another cut sequence, we learn that Dr. Pretorius has been drummed out of university because he was Frankenstein's mentor.
But was booted out. Booted, my dear Baron, is the word for knowing too much.
15 years earlier, actor Ernest Thesiger had been James Whale's mentor. His bearing and cultivated accent are likely adopted from Thesiger, although the older man was always more flamboyant. During filming, he did needlework on set, referring to himself as the stitchin' bitch.
You like gin? It is my only weakness.
The role of Pretorius, originally intended for The Invisible Man's Claude Rains, was retooled for Thesiger, as Whale had done with The Old Dark House,
I like gin.
creating a character of insidious comic menace.
My first experiment was so lovely that we made her a queen.
This scene also showcases the work of John P. Fulton, the man who had made The Invisible Man possible. And here makes this unbelievably complicated effect almost imperceptible. A final jar had originally contained a baby resembling Boris Karloff, but this was deemed a step too far, although you can still see it in the wide shot. Thesiger gets many of the film's best-known lines.
To a new world of gods and monsters.
And, of course,
The Bride of Frankenstein.
Universal got some publicity out of The Search for the Bride, but in an early draft of the script, Whale had already scrawled the name Elsa Lanchester. Whale had met Lanchester in the mid-20s, working as an artist's model and dancer, which may be why he thought of her. Lanchester's bird-like movements give the bride a completely different presence to Karloff's creature. She is on screen for less than 5 minutes, but has become an indelible image of pop culture. Lanchester also plays Mary Shelley, technically Mary Godwin, in the film's opening.
She is an angel,
You think so?
Later saying that Whale wanted to show that the bride came from sweet Mary Shelley's soul. This scene was partially cut by the censors as it gleefully referred to 17-year-old Mary living in sin with the married Percy Bysshe Shelley. Historically accurate, but since Frankenstein, the Production Code Administration had tightened censorship. This would not be their only objection. The most telling addition behind the scenes is composer Franz Waxman. The first film had no incidental music at all, typical of early sound films. But by 1935, Bride of Frankenstein could boast a fabulous full score, complete with leitmotifs for the principals. Most of the Whale team returned, including Joseph McDonough, Whale's assistant director on 11 films, though Arthur Edison had now been replaced by John Mescal, another brilliant cameraman. Charles D. Hall's sets look even more magnificent, although, surprisingly, the budget was not greatly increased from the first film.
It's coming up!
This time the creation scene comes at the end, one of a few neat reversals Whale introduces.
Oh, look! Milady! He's alive!
Sit down. Sit down.
Sit down.
These reflect the creature's new role as lead. And this is not just a question of top billing. This is, for the only time in the Universal series, his story. The settings reflecting his journey, from peaceful to hunted. Another of Whale's reversals is that the creature is resurrected, then crucified. Amazing that got past the censors. In this scene, the creature was to have encountered a statue of Christ on the cross and tries to help a fellow victim, but that was considered irreligious. Throughout the film, Whale does everything he can to make the creature a martyr. You can just see the jump, allowing the crucifix to remain while the rest of the scene fades. The creature is more violent this time, killing at least 10 people. It would have been more, but moans were dubbed in to reduce the body count. But he's certainly provoked, a victim of people's ignorance and intolerance.
Keep still!
This time, he saves a girl from drowning. And for his trouble, but he has also shown love.
Come in, my poor friend. No one will hurt you here.
The Bride of Frankenstein is an incredible balancing act of comedy and horror, drama and the outright bizarre. But it's this scene on which the whole thing pivots.
I cannot see you. You must please excuse me, but I'm blind.
Based on the novel, this is where the creature learns to speak.
Friend.
Where he is happy with his first and only friend.
Alone. Bad. Friend. Good.
Scenes like this tend not to stand the test of time, but the sincerity of O.P. Hegge's delivery and the raw emotion of Karloff's reaction forbids any cynicism. Whale understood the scene's importance. When Hegge was unavailable, rather than recasting, he shut down production for 10 days to wait. The first film made the creature human. This gives him a soul.
Look, it's the monster!
Making the end of the sequence utterly heartbreaking.
Friend.
How many horror films are driven by a monster wanting a friend?
Friend.
How many ask us to empathise with one? Which is how he falls under the power of Dr. Pretorius, who wants to create a second creature.
Woman, friend for you.
Forcing Frankenstein to help by getting the creature to abduct Elizabeth.
Is that you, Henry?
Viewed from the outside this time, another reversal. Frankenstein goes to work.
This heart is useless. I must have another.
In an early version, the heart that Karl obtains is Elizabeth's. So the Bride of Frankenstein has the heart of Frankenstein's bride. I'm sort of glad they didn't go through with it, but thematically you can't fault it.
She's alive.
So the creature gets the friend for whom he has longed. But for all the science fiction concepts, arch humour and stylized presentation, the Bride of Frankenstein's success is its humanity, a tragedy of loneliness and rejection.
She hates me, like others.
Most horror movie monsters seem indestructible, but Karloff's creature is vulnerable.
No! No!
Scarred inside and out, hated for his appearance. He just doesn't want to be alone.
We belong dead.
Again, Henry was to have perished, but days before the premiere, Whale changed his mind and reshot key moments of the climax.
Yes, go. You live.
Though there wasn't time to redo everything, so Henry is still there as the lab explodes. Clive himself would die 2 years later of tuberculosis exacerbated by alcoholism. One of Whale's most British habits was pausing filming every day at 11:04 for tea. When a zealous studio manager pointed out this was costing $400 a day, Junior Lemley said to let Whale work however he wanted. This was the stature of James Whale in 1935, and Lemley's faith was rewarded. The Bride of Frankenstein is funny and horrifying, strange and wonderful, brilliant and heartbreaking. Reviews were effusive. Hollywood's Pantages Theatre took more in one day than it would normally take in a week. It was even Oscar nominated for sound design. But it wasn't enough. As Whale was working on Showboat, another critical and commercial smash, the studio was passing out of the hands of the Lemleys into corporate ownership. From now on, the bottom line was everything. No more risks, no more Mavericks, no more tea breaks. Whale's regular editor Ted Kent said of Whale, he had complete control from beginning to end. I don't believe he could have worked any other way. So it would prove. Though there would be other good films, Whale could not function in this new regime and retired from the industry in 1941. By contrast, not even the mid-30s downturn in horror seemed to affect Boris Karloff, and when reissues of Dracula and Frankenstein brought the genre back into fashion, he returned to his signature role. Unlike Whale, who detested his studio nickname of the Monster Man, Karloff embraced the genre that had made him famous and would remain a horror star for the rest of his life. Whale took to painting and made occasional returns to the theatre. He loved film but rejected all movie offers, seemingly lacking confidence. In 1950 he directed a segment of an anthology film, but his story, Hello Out There, was cut.
You see?
Hearing you say that, a man could die and still be ahead of the game.
According to the BFI's Gavin Lambert, who interviewed Whale in 1952, the loss seemed to have a traumatic effect on him. In the mid-50s, a stroke forced new limitations on Whale, meaning he could no longer even paint. For a man who had once said, "If I didn't get a chance to direct a stage play once in a while, I should die," the situation was intolerable. Whale's body was discovered in his swimming pool by his maid on the 29th of May 1957. The note he left stressed that no one should grieve, saying, "I have had a wonderful life, but now it is over." At the time of his death, he was so forgotten by the industry that only Sight and Sound ran a tribute. But just months later, his films appeared on television for the first time, winning a new generation of fans.
Yes, I hope so.
The Frankenstein series continued another 6 films, but that's a story for another video. To me, in the Universal canon, there are James Whale's films and everyone else's. Frankenstein is the first horror film I remember watching, and as a child, it scared me. The shock has lessened with familiarity, but Karloff's creature remains as affecting as ever, because in him we see a little bit of ourselves. The loner, the outsider, the misfit who doesn't fit in, still reaching upwards for the light. But they're also fun, and dramatic, and entertaining, and everything you could want a film to be. They radiate a sense of being made by a man who was enjoying himself and wanted us to share. That's what a James Whale horror means to me. Thanks for watching, and as always, thanks to our Patreon supporters and to our YouTube members for making these longer videos possible. We really could not do them without you. Frankenstein is my earliest horror memory. What's yours? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're here, why not pick up a copy of Dark Corner's horror movie quiz book? There's a link in the description below. And coming this Christmas, my own take on this story, my new book, The Legacy of Frankenstein.